The flickering television cast dancing shadows across Paul Edgecombe's wrinkled face. The room was filled with a soft, nostalgic glow, the kind that only old black and white films could provide. Paul sat there, lost in the echoes of the past, the images on the screen blending seamlessly with his memories. Sounds of laughter and applause from a bygone era filled the room. The joyous noise seemed to transport Paul back to a time when life was simpler, yet more intense. Each laugh, each clap was a reminder of the vibrant world that once was, a world that now seemed so distant. It was a stark contrast to the quiet hum of the assisted living home in his twilight years. The silence here was almost deafening, broken only by the occasional murmur of a nurse or the distant sound of a television. It was a place of rest, but also of reflection, where the past often felt more real than the present. Memories, like ghosts from a distant past, haunted him. They were vivid and relentless, each one a fragment of a life lived long ago. They whispered to him in the quiet moments, reminding him of the choices he made, the paths he took, and the people he met along the way. Memories of the Green Mile, the long, narrow corridor that led to the electric chair, a place where hope and despair coexisted in a fragile balance. It was a place that had left an indelible mark on his soul, a place he could never forget. He closed his eyes, the cold steel and green linoleum vivid in his mind. He could see every detail, from the chipped paint on the walls to the flickering lights overhead. It was as if he had been transported back in time, standing once again in that grim, foreboding place. He could almost smell the disinfectant and fear that clung to the air. The scent was a potent mix of cleanliness and dread, a reminder of the lives that had been lost there and the ones that still hung in the balance. He could almost hear the shuffle of shuffling feet on the Green Mile. The sound was a constant, a reminder of the men who had walked that path before him, each step a testament to their final journey. He could almost feel the weight of the secret he carried. It was a burden that had grown heavier with each passing year, a truth that he had kept hidden from the world, but could never escape himself. Paul had seen a lot in his long life. He had witnessed the rise and fall of empires, the ebb and flow of human history. But it was the personal moments, the intimate encounters, that had left the deepest impressions on his heart. He had witnessed the best and worst of humanity. He had seen acts of incredible kindness and unspeakable cruelty, moments of pure joy and profound sorrow. Each experience had shaped him, molding him into the man he had become. But nothing had left a mark on his soul as deep as his time as a block supervisor on Cold Mountain Penitentiary's death row. It was a place where life and death intersected, where every decision carried immense weight. The year was 1932, a time of great turmoil and uncertainty when the world seemed to be teetering on the edge of chaos. The world outside was grappling with the Great Depression. People were struggling to survive, to find hope in a world that seemed to have lost its way. But within those cold, unforgiving walls, a different kind of drama unfolded. It was a drama of life and death, of justice and mercy, of human frailty and divine intervention. A story of despair, miracles, and the heavy burden of truth. It was a story that had changed him forever, a story that he felt compelled to share. As the years melted away, Paul found himself drawn back to that time. The memories were like a siren's call, pulling him back to the Green Mile, to the people he had known, and the events that had shaped his life. Back to the Green Mile, where he met a man who would forever change his life. A man whose presence had been both a blessing and a curse. A man who had shown him the true meaning of compassion and sacrifice. A man named John Coffey. A man whose name was synonymous with mystery and wonder. A man who had left an indelible mark on Paul's soul. A man condemned to death for a crime he didn't commit. A man whose innocence was as clear as the sky, yet whose fate had been sealed by the prejudices and fears of others. A man touched by something extraordinary. John Coffey was more than just a prisoner. He was a beacon of hope, a symbol of the inexplicable and the divine. John Coffey, with his hulking frame and childlike innocence, was a puzzle. He was a man of contradictions, a gentle giant who possessed a power that defied explanation. The gentle giant who sobbed at the thought of darkness held a power that defied explanation. It was a power that could heal the sick, a power that could bring light to the darkest of places, a power that challenged everything Paul thought he knew about life, death, and the nature of good and evil. It was a power that forced him to confront his own beliefs, to question the very foundations of his understanding. Paul shifted in his seat, the pain in his joints a constant reminder of his age. The years had not been kind to him, but they had also given him a wealth of experiences, a lifetime of stories to tell. He picked up a worn photograph from the table beside him. It was a tangible link to the past, a reminder of the man he once was and the journey he had taken. It was a picture of him as a young prison guard, his uniform crisp, his face still full of youthful hope. He remembered the day it was taken, the sense of pride and purpose he had felt. He hardly recognized the man staring back at him. The years had changed him, had etched lines of wisdom and sorrow into his face. He was a different man then, untouched by the weight of the secrets he carried. He had been innocent, unburdened by the knowledge of the darkness that lurked in the world. He longed to go back, to warn his younger self about the pain and the wonder that awaited him on the Green Mile. But he knew that such a thing was impossible, that the past could not be changed. But some stories he knew were meant to be told only after they had ended. They were stories that needed the perspective of time, the wisdom of age, to be fully understood. And so, Paul began to recount his tale. It was a tale of love and loss, of hope and despair, of the extraordinary and the mundane, a tale of the Green Mile, a place where the boundaries between life and death, between the ordinary and the miraculous, were blurred, a place that had changed him forever, and a place that he would carry with him for the rest of his days. Cold Mountain Penitentiary, a name that sent shivers down the spines of even the most hardened criminals. It was a fortress of despair, a place where the walls seemed to whisper tales of sorrow and regret. It was a place where hope went to die, where the very air seemed to be thick with the weight of lost dreams and broken spirits. The year was 1932, a time when the world outside was grappling with the Great Depression, but inside these walls, another kind of struggle was unfolding. The air was thick with humidity and despair as Paul Edgecombe, a seasoned prison guard, walked the Green Mile. Each step he took echoed with the memories of those who had walked before him, their final journey marked by the same green linoleum floor. The corridor, named for its eerie green linoleum floor, was the last walk for those condemned to die in the electric chair, Old Sparky. It was a path lined with the ghosts of the past, each one a silent witness to the final moments of the condemned. Paul ran a tight ship on E Block. He was a man of order and discipline, ensuring that even in a place of chaos there was a semblance of control. He believed in dignity, even in death. To him, every man deserved a measure of respect, no matter their crimes, but his sense of humanity was constantly tested within those walls. The weight of his responsibilities bore down on him, each decision a potential tipping point between justice and cruelty. He worked alongside Brutus Howell, a man as imposing as his nickname suggested, yet fair and just. Brutal was a rock, a steady presence in the turbulent sea of prison life. There was Dean Stanton, young and still wet behind the ears, but eager to learn. Dean's youthful enthusiasm was a stark contrast to the grim reality of the Green Mile. And then there was Percy Wetmore. Percy, with his slicked-back hair and cruel eyes, was a constant thorn in Paul's side. His presence was a reminder of the darker side of human nature. Percy, with his slicked-back hair and cruel eyes, was a constant thorn in Paul's side. His sadistic tendencies and lack of empathy made him a dangerous element within the prison. One hot, sweltering day, a new inmate arrived. The air was thick with anticipation as the gates creaked open to reveal the latest addition to the Green Mile. He was a giant of a man, towering over the guards. His presence was almost otherworldly, a figure that seemed to belong to a different time and place. His name was John Coffey, and he was convicted of a horrific crime, the rape and murder of 2 young girls. The charges were enough to make even the most hardened guards shudder. Despite his imposing size, John Coffey was a gentle soul. His eyes, filled with a deep sadness, spoke of a man who had seen too much pain. He was afraid of the dark and cried at the slightest provocation. His vulnerability was a stark contrast to his physical presence. He possessed a naive innocence that seemed at odds with the heinous acts he was accused of. It was as if he was a child trapped in the body of a giant. "I don't belong here," John Coffey mumbled as he shuffled into his cell, his eyes wide with fear. His words echoed in the silence, a plea that seemed to hang in the air. Paul, despite his years of experience, felt a tremor of unease. There was something about John Coffey that he couldn't quite put his finger on, something that set him apart from the other inmates. There was something about John Coffey, something inexplicable, that set him apart from the other inmates. It was a feeling that gnawed at Paul, a sense that there was more to this man than met the eye. The arrival of John Coffey disturbed the grim routine of Cold Mountain. His presence was like a ripple in a still pond, unsettling the carefully maintained order of the prison. His presence was a puzzle, a dissonance in the symphony of despair. It was as if he carried with him a piece of another world, a world where hope still existed. The guards, hardened by years of witnessing the worst of humanity, found themselves questioning their own judgments. They were used to seeing the worst in people, but John Coffey challenged their perceptions. The Green Mile, usually just a corridor leading to death, was about to become a stage for something extraordinary, something that would etch itself onto the souls of everyone present. It was a place where the lines between good and evil, justice and mercy would blur, leaving an indelible mark on all who walked its path. Percy Wetmore seemed to relish the suffering of the condemned. His eyes would light up with a twisted glee whenever he had the opportunity to inflict pain or fear. It was as if he drew energy from the misery of others, feeding his own dark soul. He saw himself as the ultimate authority on the Green Mile, his ego inflated by his powerful family connections. Percy strutted around the prison like a peacock, his chest puffed out and his head held high, convinced that his position made him untouchable. Paul watched with growing disgust as Percy tormented the inmates, his methods ranging from petty cruelty to outright sadism. It wasn't just the physical abuse that sickened Paul, but the psychological torment Percy inflicted. He would whisper threats and insults, breaking down the spirits of the men who were already facing the end of their lives. Percy's favorite target was Eduard Delacroix, a Cajun man convicted of arson and murder. Delacroix, despite his crimes, was a small, fragile man who seemed out of place in the harsh environment of the prison. His vulnerability made him an easy target for Percy's cruelty. Delacroix, small and wiry, had a pet mouse he called Mr. Jingles. The mouse was a tiny creature, but it brought immense comfort to Delacroix. In a place devoid of kindness, Mr. Jingles was a beacon of hope and companionship. The mouse was Delacroix's only source of joy in that desolate place. He would spend hours talking to Mr. Jingles, sharing his thoughts and fears, finding solace in the tiny creature's presence. It was a small, fragile thread of happiness in an otherwise bleak existence. One day, Percy, in a fit of spite, deliberately crushed Mr. Jingles under his boot. The act was swift and brutal, a display of power and malice that left everyone in shock. The sound of the tiny bones breaking echoed in the silent corridor, a chilling reminder of Percy's cruelty. The look of anguish on Delacroix's face was heartbreaking. He crumpled to the floor, his sobs echoing through the prison. The loss of Mr. Jingles was more than just the death of a pet. It was the shattering of the last bit of hope Delacroix had clung to. Paul, his patience wearing thin, was about to confront Percy when John Coffey spoke up. Paul's fists were clenched, his body trembling with the urge to put an end to Percy's reign of terror. But before he could act, a deep, calm voice cut through the tension. "Don't," John Coffey whispered, his voice deep and rumbling. "I can help." There was a quiet authority in his words, a sense of calm that seemed to envelop the room. Everyone turned to look at Coffey, their curiosity piqued by his unexpected intervention. The other inmates and guards watched in stunned silence as John Coffey reached out his giant hand. His movements were slow and deliberate, as if he was performing a sacred ritual. The air seemed to thicken with anticipation, every eye fixed on Coffey. He seemed to pull something from the air, something invisible, and then he gently placed it on the floor. It was as if he was drawing out the very essence of life itself, channeling some unseen force that only he could perceive. A collective gasp filled the air. The tension was palpable, a mix of fear and wonder that held everyone in its grip. It was a moment suspended in time, a breathless pause before the miraculous unfolded. Mr. Jingles, perfectly fine, scurried out from under John Coffey's hand and back to his master. The tiny creature moved with a newfound energy, as if it had been reborn. Delacroix's eyes widened in disbelief, his tears of sorrow turning to tears of joy. The air crackled with an unseen energy. It was as if the very fabric of reality had been altered, a ripple of the extraordinary passing through the mundane. Everyone could feel it, a tingling sensation that raised the hairs on their arms. Paul, a man of reason and logic, found himself questioning his sanity. He had always believed in the tangible, the explainable, but what he had just witnessed defied all rational explanation. It was a moment that challenged his very understanding of the world. Had he really just witnessed a miracle? The question echoed in his mind, a persistent whisper that refused to be silenced. He looked at John Coffey, searching for answers in the gentle giant's eyes. The guards were speechless, their faces a mixture of disbelief and fear. They had seen many things in their time on the Green Mile, but nothing like this. It was a moment that would be etched into their memories forever. Percy, his face pale, backed away from John Coffey, a flicker of fear in his eyes. For the first time, the arrogant guard seemed unsure of himself, his confidence shaken by the inexplicable event. He knew he had crossed a line, but his pride wouldn't allow him to admit it. Instead, he tried to mask his fear with a defiant glare, refusing to show any sign of weakness. He would have his revenge, he vowed silently. The humiliation he felt would not go unanswered. Percy was a man who thrived on control, and he would not let this challenge to his authority go unpunished. From that day forward, the atmosphere on the Green Mile changed. The sense of dread that had always hung over the place was now mingled with a strange new energy. It was as if the very walls had absorbed the miracle, holding on to the memory of that extraordinary moment. The air hummed with an unspoken tension, a sense of something extraordinary brewing. The guards and inmates alike moved with a heightened awareness, their senses attuned to the possibility of the miraculous. The guards walked with a newfound caution, their eyes darting nervously to John Coffey's cell. They had seen what he was capable of, and it had left them both awed and wary. The Green Mile, once a symbol of despair and finality, now held a flicker of something else, something akin to hope. It was a fragile, tentative hope, but it was there, a small light in the darkness that had enveloped the prison for so long.